Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting jewishinsider.com. We are delighted to be joined today by AJC Herzog, chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel. Before entering his position at the Jewish Agency, Mr. Herzog served as a member of Knesset from 2003 to 2018. During his time in the Knesset, he served as chairman of the Israeli Labor Party and as Knesset opposition leader. Over the past 15 years, Mr. Herzog has also held several ministerial posts within the Israeli government. AJC Herzog will be in conversation with AJC CEO David Harris on Israel-Diaspora relations, where we are today, how we got here, and the future of this important relationship. After we hear from our speakers, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or use the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. David, you have the floor.
Julian, thank you very much, and hello to all of our viewers around the world. And a special thanks to our guest and a very dear friend of AJC, AJC, or as his friends call him, Bougie Herzog. So Bougie, since I'm going to call you Bougie, before we get into the real substance, I'm sure many of our viewers want to know the origin of the name Bougie, which, if I'm not mistaken, has a certain French connection.
Yes, absolutely French connection. First of all, thank you, David. It's a true honor to speak for AJC and speak to your audience. Your organization is a very, very unique and important institution in Jewish life, Jewish world, in the state of Israel. I can tell you that the law that gave special status to the Jewish Agency and the WZO, the World Zionist Organization in Israel, was legislated as an outcome of a deal struck between David Ben-Gurion and the chairman of AJC, Jacob Blaustein, in the early 50s. So, you know, you left your mark on history and you're still doing it today. Thank you very much. So Bougie, my mother, actually people know about my father's lineage. You know, President of Israel, son of the chief rabbi, him and my uncle Abba Iban and many other legendary Israelis in the list. But my mother was born in Egypt on the banks of the Suez Canal. Her father was chief engineer of the Suez Canal. And my grandparents were simply fled as refugees from Egypt in 1947, following the UN resolution of forming a Jewish state and the riots that ensued. So my mother's mother tongue was French. And as a rare breed, I was a cute baby, unlike any other baby. My mother called me Bouba in Hebrew and Juju in French, which is Bouba, which means doll. And it stuck as Bougie, and nobody knew it. It was a family secret. Until one day in a major party convention, thousands of people, Prime Minister Ehud Barak got up on the podium and said, I think Bougie should, I don't know, lead a committee or something. And so everybody turned around, who's Bougie? And if you look at the book, Startup Nation, you'll see that it's a familiar way of knowing Israelis like Bibi, Bougie, and Boogie.
Okay, so now our audience can all call you Bougie. You're all in on the secret.
Absolutely.
Now, more to your bio, because if the subject matter is Israel-Diaspora relations, you yourself are a bridge. You lived in New York, if I recall, not far from where I'm living and speaking right now on the East Side. You were at the Ramaz School. What are your recollections of your years in New York, and how did that influence your whole outlook on the unity of the Jewish people and Israel-Diaspora relations?
It had a huge impact on my life, huge. And I think that whoever deals with this issue should experience, if possible, something in living in Jewish communities abroad. So I came as an adolescent. My father was then Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. In those days, you know, it was post Yom Kippur War, and my father defended the right of Israel in front of the family of nations in a debate which is heralded until today as one of the greatest speeches of the 20th century, defending Zionism against the resolution equating Zionism with racism. And so the spirit was different, but I was exposed to the pluralistic nature of Jewish life. And I am really grateful to my parents who had no reservations about it, meaning they enabled me. I went to an Orthodox school, to Ramaz, a school which impacted my life tremendously. And the headmaster, Rabbi Haskell Luxstein, is a mentor of mine all my life. But it also taught me, I went to many other institutions. I went to Massa, Camp Massa and Camp Ramah, and I went to various other programs. I simply spent all my life getting to know what it is to be Jewish abroad. And I must say, in those days, there was totally ignorant, a lack of knowledge, ignorant behavior about what Israel is all about. What is life in Israel? People didn't know. So there was a different vision of Israel than reality at times. But it did impact my being in the fact that I am adamant about the need to be a bridge between Israel and the Jewish people, and to keep this bridge going, because I think it's a clear need of the Jewish people to do whatever they can not to split.
So I want to continue, but I want to be sure that our audience, if you haven't heard the speech of Klein Herzog, of Bougie's father in November 1975, at the time of UN General Assembly Resolution 3379, which was the infamous Zionism is Racism resolution, I urge you not only to read it, but if possible to watch it, because there's drama not just in the words, but in the actions of Bougie's father at the podium of the UN General Assembly. So let's fast forward. Since 2018, you've been chairman of Safnut, of the Jewish Agency. Many people on the call undoubtedly know a lot about Safnut. I suspect there are some people who don't really know an awful lot about this very storied agency, which I think began in 1929 in Vienna. Is that right?
It actually began way before that.
Even before.
Began, you believe it or not, David, it began 100 years ago with a conference called the San Remo Conference,
of course,
which is a very historic pillar in our right for self-determination in Eretz Israel. Because that conference was a conference where they convened all the leaders of the world post-World War I, headed by Lord Arthur Balfour, the one who gave the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which recognized the right of the Jewish people for a national homeland. And they took that resolution, that letter of Balfour, and inserted it in the resolutions of the British Mandate, which was to be formed in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel and Palestine. And this is like the source of our right of self-determination, of statehood in Palestine. And in that process, they've agreed that in order to implement the Balfour Declaration, it's a fascinating chapter in history, they must form an entity that will help the Jews deliver this vision. And it took 2 years for them until they completed it and gave the charter, the mandate to the Brits in 1922, in which they wrote there will be a Jewish agency. Imagine the family of nations decided there will be a Jewish agency. And it will be done with the Zionist movement, with Herzl's movement. And therefore, in 1929, after squabbling and quarreling like people in our camp know how to do, they finally agreed on how to form the Jewish agency. And the Jewish agency's charter was to found a Jewish state, and it did. And I sit in the room in which David Ben-Gurion sat in and led our nation to independence and sat in even later until 1962 as prime minister. So yes, indeed, it's a very historic organization. Then we were commissioned and we built about 900 villages and towns in Israel. We built the national infrastructure on behalf of the Jewish people. And then, of course, we were commissioned to bring Olim, to ingather the exiles. And we brought in 4 million Olim so far around, including 35,000 last year, including 1,200 during the COVID-19 crisis. And in the last generation, we have become a central pillar as part of our raison d'etre of dealing with the need of the Jewish people to deal with themselves and Israel at heart, meaning connecting Jews to each other, connecting Jews by immersive experiences, by partnerships, by twinning schools, by sending thousands of shlichim emissaries from summer camps to educational projects and shinshinim all over the world. And finally, by the famous law, which I mentioned of Jacob Blaustein, your founder, we are representing the Jewish people vis-a-vis the government and the Parliament of Israel.
Okay, that's a lot, and I want to unpack some of that, Bougie.
Please
but
go
first
ahead.
of all, again, I want our audience to understand that, and correct me here, but David Ben-Gurion, when the state was announced on May 14th, 1948, was at the time serving as the head of the Jewish
Chairman
Agency.
of the Jewish, my position, sorry.
Your position.
Yes,
I want everyone to understand.
He was chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency. I don't know, and I don't want to be with hubris, but I can say I was chairman of the Labour Party, which he founded, and I was chairman of the Jewish Agency, which he led, of course. But humbly speaking, yes, this organization represented the entire body politic of the Jewish people and the Yishuv, the Jewish community in Palestine. And you know, I walk in this building. We even published a book recently in English and in Hebrew about the building. It's a historical building with enormous stories speaking from the walls.
And I was in your building last year, and you gave us a tour of that building, and the walls speak. It's quite
absolutely, absolutely, yes.
And by the way, since you speak about hubris, I'd rather speak about yiffus, about the sort of the prestige, the honor. We have a Herzog on the American Jewish Committee staff. Your nephew.
Yes. My nephew, Dr. Alexandra Herzog, and she's a great personality in her own right, and she's from your northeastern region. Absolutely,
exactly.
We're very proud of.
Boston.
We're very proud of her in the family.
So my screen is too small to see everyone on the call. I'm sure she's there, and we're all waving to your niece. So let's begin now. It's 2018. You become the chairman of the Jewish Agency. What are the top 2 or 3 priorities? We all know as CEOs, if you have 20 priorities, you have no priorities. What were the top 2 or 3 priorities when you became the leader, where you said, we have to make a profound difference on A, on B, and on C? What are those
and that's
issues?
Prior to the Corona COVID-19
Absolutely.
crisis.
And then we'll come
because
to Corona.
we had changed something. So first of all, the first priority was dealing with the rift. There is an apparent rift, or there's a growing, disparity between Jews in Israel and Jews in North America. Let me explain. I'm not ignoring Jews all over the world, but we have 2 main pillar communities in Jewish world. Israel, about 6.5 million, and North America, about 6.5 million. I call it Jerusalem and Babylon. I go to the ancient history of the 2 Talmuds, which were created in the ancient times between Jerusalem and Babylon. And I say, where's the interaction between current Jerusalem and Babylon? Now, there's enormous interaction. Don't get me wrong. I think that as opposed to the notion that there's an irreversible rift, I beg to differ. I think there's a lot of love of Israel, Ahavat Israel, and there's a lot of connections and an enormous amount of intertwining connections, but we also know that there are strong undercurrents of diversity and change. And I say outright, and I said it definitely up to the COVID, that there is lack of knowledge, total lack of knowledge on behalf of Israelis as to what it is to be Jewish abroad, and that there's an enormous lack of knowledge by world Jewry, especially North American Jewry, about what Israel is all about. It's two different societies of huge numbers, or kind of developing, evolutionizing differently. You know, my son who is in a combat unit, his perception of life is different from my best friend's son in Ramaz, who goes to college. That's the way it is, and it's okay, provided they know each other, provided they understand they're under the same nation, that they must not be split, but rather have a dialogue and respect. So what I've done since going into office, I've done whatever I can to lower the rift or the tension or the differences by both initiating huge programs to educate Israelis, including all schools in Israel on what it is to be Jewish abroad or diaspora Jewry lessons, including going to the most extreme rabbis of all groups in Israel and speaking to them directly in four eyes. And I found a lot of admission of lack of knowledge and willingness to know more. And the same I did by crisscrossing the entire world, especially communities in North America, and telling them, guys, you don't know enough, you don't know much about Israel. Now I'm aware about the issues of unaffiliated and people who have frustrations and the political divide which looms all over it. We know it, but I tell everybody, we must think way beyond the political divide, and because we have a huge strategic goal of maintaining our nation. The second challenge erupted as soon as I went in, and you're very much aware of it because you're dealing with it yourself, is unfortunately the growing hate of Jews, or let's say the growing symptoms of hate of Jews, because hate of Jews was always there, anti-Semitism and hate of Jews, and especially, you know, in light of Pittsburgh and what ensued. And you know, you see it even today. And that's a major challenge because that impacts everybody's lives. And we say, and you know, I'm challenged on this in Israel. Do you think that it's only Aliyah is the solution? And I say Aliyah is a very important metaphysical part of our being, but we advocate that every Jew has the full right to live and enjoy his or her practicing ability as Jews in whichever form and manner, wherever they want. And this is a key issue. Okay, we respect diaspora and its needs to thrive and succeed. And finally, there's a major question which nobody has enough time to think about and delve into, but there are emerging communities of human beings around the world, some say millions, who knock on our doors and say, you know, we are part of your nation. And I'm not talking about conversion in the United States. I'm talking about communities all over the world, from the heartland of the Amazonas to Africa and elsewhere. And the question is, where's Judaism going to? What's the future? This is fascinating, and there's not enough people thinking about it in depth. So these were the main three pillars that we were dealing with. Apart from connecting Jews to one another, I included under our canopy the issue of the ultra-Orthodox, the issue of Israelis abroad. You have about 1 million Israelis abroad. And how do they immerse themselves in Jewish life? Some of them are very active in your organization. So that was until COVID-19 erupted.
So thank you for that. Let's focus on the first issue first. The tensions that you described that have emerged between segments of North American Jewry and Israel, often around the question, Bougie, as you know so well, of religious pluralism, of the role of the Rabbanut, or the chief rabbi in Israel, over what appears to be the monopoly on practice in Israel. Do you see a role for the Sachnut? Your predecessor, Natan Sharansky, tried to play that role. Do you see a role for yourself today in practically bridging that divide? Or do we simply have to learn to live with difference?
No, through Natan's work, we developed the whole notion of educating peoplehood in Israel. Because part of it is lack of knowledge. You speak to Israelis, they tell you, look, we were never exposed to any other style. We could have been totally secular, but our bar mitzvah would have been an Orthodox synagogue. That's okay. but they don't know much about life abroad. And our shlichim, you know, who are operating on the ground in communities all over the world, and especially in North America, and our shinshinim,
representatives or
our emissaries. And we also have our shinshinim, meaning 18-year-old gap year kids who serve in communities, have gone back to Israel and said, look, we had a fascinating experience. These are brothers and sisters. And with that, we built kind of a club of returning emissaries to impact Israeli society. And with that, we started also aligning with many programs of sent people to see for themselves. And what I've done in a very elaborate way is to educate Israelis about it. You see a different music. People are very much aware of it. You have a Haredi minister for diaspora affairs who speaks about working with all streams and all groups of Judaism. Now, I'm not saying that that's over. It's a very complicated situation. We know politics, we know lack of knowledge, we know rhetoric that's insulting. But the same goes either way. It's like understand Israeli politics. For the year and a half, I've been bombarded. How come you have a second election and a third election? Guys, this is the process. This is Israel. And you know what? Perhaps it's a source of pride. 3 times the nation went until there was a decision. Okay, with all the tensions that ensued, still it was a respectable process done in a very dignified manner when, you know, with a heated debate. So see the half of the cup filled and not the half cup empty. And therefore, I think that both parts should not negate each other. Now, I say to people tell me in America, you know, we are second-rate Jews. No, you're not. You're absolutely not. You're part and parcel of the Jewish people. And as such, you can make aliyah, for example, any given moment. It's true that marriage and divorce are under the Rabbanut in Israel, and the Rabbanut negates you. That doesn't mean that the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, or even the political system Israel feels the same way. We know what it is, it's politics, and I think it's an educational process to get to know each other and convince that under such circumstances, we should have a dialogue.
And you know this very well, but AJC is a partner of yours in trying to achieve that goal.
Yes, I congratulate you for your enormous efforts, and you've been incredible partners.
Well, but there's still work to be done, as you've outlined. Bougie, you mentioned Aliyah. Who's coming to Israel today? From where and why?
So there's 2 things. During the crisis, you know, Aliyah never stopped to Israel, including in the worst of times. And so for example, in March, April, we had about 1,200 Olim from about 15 nations who were pre-interviewed, pre-approved before the crisis. Actually, in this season, usually the Aliyah doesn't go to absorption centers, but rather to pre-arranged apartments. But we had to bring them in and drive them to the apartments and quarantine them for 2 weeks and make sure that 3 times a day we bring them food and we check how they're doing. We also brought Jews from Ethiopia during the whole period. About, you know, separately, about 400 Jews came from Ethiopia. Now, we project a huge rise in Aliyah following the COVID-19 crisis and kind of the relaxation of an ability to come to Israel. We see it in enormous numbers, overwhelming numbers, in the approaches to our global center from all over the world. We have a global center that operates almost 24/7. It's amazing the amount of approaches that we have. And this is part and parcel because many communities are suffering heavily. Many people find themselves at risk, at distress. There are communities with enormous mortality rates outside the United States, by the way. And people are saying to themselves in these crazy times, Israel emerges as a stable, well-managed country with a good health system, etc. So anyway, it was in our minds, let's implement it.
Are you also seeing, Bougie, because you said another of your challenges was the growing anti-Semitism around the world. Are you seeing Aliyah principally driven by push factors anti-Semitism, economic distress, pull factors, Zionism, fulfillment of a dream, or a combination of both? And what are the principal countries driving this today?
Okay, it's a combination of both, because the pull factor is that, you know, when you have, let's take a community like Italy, you know what, because they're willing that we speak about them. So from day one, Italy, the Italian Jewish community literally collapsed. It has 20,000 Jews in 22 communities with historical names in Judaism like Venice, Livorno, and Genoa, and others. And clearly, when I spoke to the leadership of the community from day one, I never heard such devastating description of what the community went through. We even had a head start by Israelis, where we raised hundreds of thousands of dollars by the Israeli public to the community in Italy, way and above our loan fund, which we had established to assist Jewish communities all over the world, which is in operation, has already distributed $7 million, and the overwhelming demand, by the way, of issues that are on the table. So in this respect, we found out that the community needs assistance and help. There are communities that approached us to assist them in how they get and what they do on Shavuot, in the holiday feast of Pentecost, with respect to social distancing. I mean, communities were devastating and turned to Israel for assistance. So you can say it's a push factor, meaning, okay, life is better there, or a pull factor, because we see on social networks clearly a rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric, including vandalizing synagogues and other events all over the world. And we are all aware of it. You're definitely aware.
So Bougie, if you met a young American Jew, for example, and I think many of us on this call know such young American Jews who essentially say, Israel means nothing to me. It's far away. I have no connection to Israel. What would be your short speech to that young person about why Israel should matter to this young person 5,000 miles away today? Why?
Well, so that's a beautiful question, because when I meet many people who were struck by little, you know, enkindling, all of a sudden when they landed here, they felt at home. It's something inexplicable. But all in all, I would say that, you know, we are the nation state of the Jewish people. We are a fountain of strength and resilience and culture and knowledge of the Jewish people. Yes, we have many issues, many problems, many challenges, many things to debate, but you'd feel at home. It's the state of the Jews, and any Jew is welcome here to be part and parcel of this saga, or at least feel like that he has or she has a safe haven to be there at any given moment. And I think this gives a sense of confidence and relaxation for people, even if they have dual citizenship, or even if they have just getting to know the country, they all of a sudden they see that this is their land, this is their place to be around the world if need be, or if they want to be.
So let me now flip the question. Your three sons were born into your family, so they have an understanding of the larger Jewish world. But lots of Israeli 18-year-olds are picking their military units, while American 18-year-olds are picking their colleges. What do you tell a young Israeli about why that young American should matter to her or to him?
So first of all, there's been an elaborate development in the last decade with birthright Taglit coming on board and exposing young Israelis to young Americans, which led to an enormous sense of connectivity and friendship that lasts. All my two kids have friends still with them even years after. Secondly, there's Massa, which is our flagship program, which brings young Jews after birthright, or in any case, to spend up to a year in Israel, interning and studying or working. There are about 4,000 of them still now in Israel throughout the crisis. And we are the first ones, in Massa, the first ones to get, and only ones to get a visa, special visa for their next applications in the semesters post-summer, where it's expected that and people will be able to come to Israel. And so I think there are many experiences, but all in all, I tell Israelis, because I speak all day long to Israelis about world Jewry. What I find, by the way, fascinating phenomena, huge amount of interest by Israelis who are asking me how the community is doing, what's going on in the Jewish world. Tell us about the phenomenon. It's something that runs deep. They just never knew how to deal with it. They didn't know the terminology, nor did they know all the facts. So more and more people, I tell them, look, it's part of their nation. I was asked yesterday by a pre-army program kid who was asking me, listen, why do we have to care about them and not about the illegal aliens or the foreign employees or the asylum seekers who are here? I said, all people are born equal by the Almighty. We're all equal. We all pray for everybody. So I think the same way you care about your neighbor who comes from, perhaps came in as an asylum seeker, you should care about your brothers and sisters and cousins in the Jewish world.
So I'm going to ask you just two more questions, Gillian, which is your kind of cue to begin to screen the questions from the audience. Let's come back for a moment to anti-Semitism. What's the role of the Jewish Agency in trying to confront the issue of anti-Semitism around the world? How exactly can you help address that question?
So there are two things that we are focused on, because there are other organizations, including like yourselves, who have a specialty and knowledge on how to tackle this issue. But one is, we have what's called Israel Fellows on campus. Right. We have a very, very successful program, mostly with the Hillels, where we bring young Israelis post-army, mostly students, to serve on campuses and really promote love of Israel. And it's an amazing program. They're called Israel Fellows, and we have a beautiful group, and I would urge AJC to get to know each one in their own region, some of these fellows, because they're just doing great work. And you hear also what's going on the ground. You realize that there is a whole onslaught against Israel with terrible things. I've seen even in the last few days, people comparing what's going on in the streets in America to the Israeli challenges and confrontations with the Palestinians, and have totally different circumstances and totally different story. But it's become like a political blame game. Now, what I'm saying is that on that matter, this is very strong. Secondly, I've led like a whole effort on the international scene, both because of my standing and the Jewish Agency standing with many governments, including on legislation. I mean, there are three tiers in dealing with anti-Semitism. First is the defensive. On the defensive side, we have a special fund, Security Assistance Fund, whereby we help communities all over the world and institutions, hundreds of them, with their equipment and facilities to protect themselves. And in fact, it saved lives, as there was a vile anti-Semitic terrorist in last Yom Kippur a year ago in Halle, Germany, who tried to break in and slaughter 100 Jews. And our equipment saved him. Secondly, the second tier is adjudication, law enforcement, going to court and prosecution and investigation. So that is something that many organizations do. And thirdly is the education. And we speak to governments and legislators on educating and defending the Jewish communities around the world.
Thank you. So my last question, because you referred to it earlier on when I asked you about your challenges in 2018, and you said pre-COVID. So now we're in the COVID era. How has that changed the agenda of the Jewish Agency and your own personal agenda?
So first of all, we know, we are faced with problems that are similar in communities, federations, organizations like you. In fact, last week, your chair of the chair of your board was kind enough to be with us in a special global forum. We convened, me and the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, with the Israeli government and global Jewish organizations, on dealing with all the new challenges that emerge out of COVID, and they are. One is, how does community function? Because usually community is based on interaction, on minyan. And it's also raising money this way, and it's also functioning this way. And now, how will community function? Second is leadership of communities, spirit of communities, hope in communities, because there are many communities who are under huge, huge stress. I mentioned it before. Thirdly is education. How will the educational institutions function? You know that many schools and Jewish institutions, kindergarten, are under huge, huge challenge now. And then the next issue has to do, of course, with anti-Semitism and security. And there is, of course, the whole notion of how do we keep, you know, Jewish global, Jewish peoplehood together under such circumstances with everything, where globalization is shunned aside into more nationalistic type structures of nations. So this is part of the challenges, and I think this is the agenda of this era.
Well said. Jillian, now to you, please.
Thank you both. Our first question comes from Jeff Robbins, an AJC National Leadership Council member from Boston, who says, I had the profound honor of hearing your father speak before a large audience at Brown University in 1977, and he captured us with an eloquent reading of the progressive case for Israel. How can Israel and its advocates in the US best succeed in making that case effectively today to those who are highly skeptical of Israel's progressive authenticity?
First of all, I remember my father visiting Brown University, and I until today get copies of letters and pictures from that appearance. And indeed, Brown bothers me because in Brown, there's a lot of BDS activities in the last 2 years. Secondly, you know, I won't go into the whole lecture. I'm reading the tweets of David Harris, and every time he tweets something about Israel, I say bingo, because it's, you know, there's a lot to explain about Israel that people don't know. Do people know that our parliament has Muslim Brotherhood heavily represented in our parliament? I was leader of the opposition. In my opposition, I had with me Muslim Brotherhood representatives. There's no other democracy in the world, or in my mind, non-democracy, that has Muslim brothers on their parliament except extreme Muslim countries. And that shows the pluralism of views in Israel. And that shows how wide the free speech and expression in Israel goes under the the adjudication of the legal system. We also have unfortunate events. We have a prime minister under indictment. We had a president under indictment. We had a president who was judged by an Arab judge. Nobody knows this. They only have a picture, a distorted picture of Israeli democracy. We have two gay ministers in the government now, which is an expression of the very progressive views in Israel about gay community and individuals. And I'm not saying everything's perfect. I'm just saying one needs to balance the picture and understand that we're a society in evolution. And when we have an evolutionary society, there could be wrongdoings and there could be good things. We give enormous amount of things to the world as a talented, developed society. And we have to strive for the best. And I'm not saying that we don't have our challenges in this political climate either.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Harvey Kaplan, an AJC Board of Governors and National Leadership Council member in Kansas City, who asks, we recently heard from Yossi Klein Halevi, who suggested that when speaking about Israel-Diaspora relations, we should frame the discussion in terms of Zionism, of the vision of Jewish peoplehood rather than religious pluralism, and that denying full status to all Jews, regardless of their religious beliefs or practice, could be considered anti-Zionist. Do you agree? And if so, where do we go from here?
Is that a legal claim? I just don't understand. Does he think it undermines the Zionist nature of the state of Israel? I just didn't understand the question so much.
Yes, I believe he's saying when we're speaking about Israel-Diaspora relations, we should frame it as a Zionist issue rather than religious pluralism.
Look, we have an elaborate society, and let me tell you something. The issue of the nature of Israel versus vis-a-vis its world Jewry brothers and sisters is not a top priority in Israeli public life. So, to claim that Israelis are not Zionists because the Rabbanut controls marriage and divorce, I think it's not correct. I'm a heavy advocate of pluralism. I have huge respect for all streams of Judaism, but there's a whole historical background to it that people don't know. And this is not now to say who's to blame or not to blame, but the reform movement came to Israel, started in Israel only in the 1960s. And by that time, the whole structure of religion and state was minted on a dialogue between religious parties and the secular leadership. So the nation is heavily secular, but the establishment on religious issues is orthodox. That's a challenge. It's different from the United States. But for this, you need a revolution. You need to educate Israelis. You need to enable new communities to emerge. And they are emerging beautifully. Both the reform and conservative movements in Israel have done very nicely in advancing and building new communities all the time, teaching and being very much viable on the media, etc. And I think it's a major challenge that has to be dealt with the body politic of Israel. And it's a process. It's not a revolution, it's an evolution.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Mike Lewis in Atlanta, who says, Israeli Jews tend to be center-right politically, and the vast majority of American Jews are liberal center-left politically. You addressed this a little earlier. What role do these political differences play in the Israel-diaspora divide, and how can we address it?
Well, I would be cautious in defining where Israelis and Americans are. I would say the following, that there are some issues that are different, looked at differently, okay? You could have the biggest support in Israel for a two-state solution and division of the land, and yet most Israelis' view and reasoning for it would be different from the way an American Jew looks at it. It has to start and end with security. And security is a prime objective of Israelis under any prerequisite. I was a leading candidate for Prime Minister of Israel in 2015. I almost won the elections. One of the issues that I've learned in depth is how deep Israelis look at this issue. And they've asked me in parlor meetings, thousands of people who were targeted as my supporters, do you really believe the Palestinians? Do you really want to have a border in Kfar Saba, which is 5 minutes from Tel Aviv? These are all legitimate questions once you're bombarded by 10,000 missiles from Gaza after pulling out your brothers and sisters from settlements and telling them there will be a new Hong Kong of the Middle East. None of you have experienced it. American Jews have no clue about it. Only now, perhaps, and I hope it doesn't happen, that they see some violence here and there. So it's an issue in terms of how one looks at it. And therefore, it's not right-wing or left-wing. Israelis do adhere to the narrative that they have to be very cautious about their ability to reach an agreement after being frustrated by many efforts that have failed.
Absolutely, thank you. Our next question comes from Jessica Frank in New York. American Jews are the biggest diaspora community in the world outside of Israel. In places like Europe and Latin America, the communities are much smaller and more homogeneous. How is working with the American Jewish community compared with other diaspora communities, and how are the priorities different?
This is actually, we have the biggest delegation in America because this is the biggest Jewish community. We have most of our Shinshinim and Shlichim, but we attend to the needs of smaller communities all over the world. It's clearly a major player in our governance. The Jewish Federations of North America are a central pillar of our governance and leadership, and therefore the American Jewish community is our main focus, but we never forget the needs of other communities. We are helping the Jews in Ethiopia. We are helping Jews in Venezuela in their dire circumstances. We're assisting Jews and risking lives of people to help Jews in very complicated countries, which I won't elaborate about. But we have people who are dealing day in, day out with the needs of Jews. And it's not only from supplying lulavim and etrogim in Sukkot, but all the way down to matzot in Pesach, or helping them in their security, or bringing Jews on Aliyah quietly. So this is why we do both. We focus on North America, and we do a lot in the rest of the world. We work in 6 different geographies simultaneously. We have 60 offices around the world. We are the biggest Jewish organization in the world.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of questions on Zoom on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, so I'll try and summarize a few. But what are some actions you believe Israel could take now to convince diaspora Jewry that they're doing everything possible to reach an agreement with Palestinians?
Well, I can't allude to it because we don't know. The situation right now is really complicated. It depends on the discussion on the Trump initiative, the Trump peace plan, as well as the debates around it, as well as its repercussions on the issue of applying Israeli law in the territories or not. These are all major questions which, we're coming to the end of our conversation. But so, Israelis want peace for sure. Israeli leadership speaks about peace. The way to get to peace is a complicated venue, because we must do whatever we can to reach peace with our neighbors. But one has, I would say, just 2 facts that impact the discourse for the next time we meet together. One is that there's a totally new structure in the Middle East. There's a kind of a different coalition than what was the classical one. It's not Israel against the Arab world. It's Israel with a big chunk of the Arab world against another part of extreme Islam. This has a huge difference even on the dialogue now regarding the Trump proposal, because you've got moderate nations such as Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, the Emiratis, etc., having strong relations, officially or unofficially, with Israel and the United States. Yet some of them, of course, have heavy criticism about some of the parts of the plan. So that is one issue. And the other issue is the internal structure within the Palestinian community. Their political system has enormous challenges. It's basically, in many ways, dysfunctional for some time. And the Israeli part of the political part in Israel, which had shifted to the right for quite some time, and I think now is moving more to the center.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Ryan Schultz in Miami. If you could give one piece of advice to American Jewish leaders about instilling a connection to Israel in the next generation, what would that advice be?
First and foremost, come to Israel and see for yourself. Before you speak, just see for yourself, enjoy the experience. Now we know that this year will be a reduction of birthright, Gluten, and Massa, and we're offering alternative experiences. But yes, do whatever you can to get the feel of it.
Great. And our next question comes from Naomi Klein in Paris. Along the same lines, do you see any bright spots in the Israel-Diaspora relationship right now, and what are they?
Well, I mentioned it. There's enormous bright spots. There's a huge amount of love of Israel in the whole dialogue. There's a huge amount of connectivity between communities and Israel. We see it all the time, and we see enormous interest in Israel. And the fact is that Israelis are also donating and contributing to their brothers and sisters abroad. Is a change of narrative or a paradigm, whereby in the past, the paradigm was that the Jewish world is the one lending a hand to Israel. Now Israel emerges as the center pillar of Jewish life abroad by assisting and aiding those communities as well.
Thank you. And I apologize to the rest of our viewers who sent in questions, but David, I want to hand it back to you for maybe a final statement or thought.
Julian, thank you. So I want to express huge thanks to Bougie for taking the time, and I think for helping to widen and deepen that bridge that must remain between Israel and the diaspora, especially Israel and American Jewry. We at AJC have always been guided by 3 core principles. Bougie mentioned one, Achavat Israel, love of Israel. The second is Am Echad, one people. we are one people. We may express our Jewish identity in multiple ways. That's also inherent to who we are. But at the end of the day, we're one people. And the notion of Kol Yisrael Haravim Zeh B'Zeh, that we are all responsible one for the other. I think you saw all of this expressed by Bougie from start to finish today, by all the work of the Jewish Agency, the Sachnut, and why we at AJC cherish this partnership with the Jewish Agency, because we have so many pressing and overlapping goals. So thank you to you, Bougie, for being with us, being our partner and friend.
Thank you for hosting me. It was a huge pleasure, really huge pleasure and honor.
Thank you. And Jillian,
all of you be well.
And I
Thank
give you the last
Jillian.
word, Jillian.
Thank you, Bougie, for joining AJC today and for a fascinating conversation. And thank you as well, David. I also want to thank our audience for joining us and showing your commitment to the topic discussed here today. In these unique times, while so many of us are separated from our family and friends, AJC is still bringing us together on the issues that matter most. Please consider making a donation to AJC so we can offer you more programs like this one, and so we can continue standing up for Israel here in America and around the world. Visit ajc.org/donate. Please join us for our next Advocacy Anywhere program tomorrow, June 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, for a particularly timely conversation on the ongoing struggle for racial justice in America with Lonnie Bunch, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, Founding Director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and an AJC Project Interchange alumnus. And lastly, for the first time in AJC history, AJC will be holding a virtual global forum, which will take place during the same week we were scheduled to be together in Berlin, June 14th through 18th, 2020. This 5-day online event will feature a moving opening plenary, conversations with world leaders, spirited debates, and the high-level content you have come to expect at an AJC Global Forum. For more information and to receive updates and announcements in your inbox, please visit ajc.org/globalforum. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you.